gets another government, in the first 100 days we're going to have some giant omnibus crime bill. I don't know about you, but it gives me the shivers. We've got to have balance in criminal justice, and we're not going to get it from the Harper government. I met a young boy in Winnipeg, just speaking to what Mr. Layton said, who was poised between falling back into a gang or finishing high school. That's the critical pivot moment in crime prevention strategy. If you can get that kid through high school with incentives so that if he gets a learning passport so he can go to college or university, you may save him from falling back into a gang. If we're serious about crime, we got to think about that young person and get the pivot right so he makes the right choice instead of the wrong choice. You can lock people up forever in prisons, but I worked in prison when I was a young graduate student. I worked with lifers. I'm utterly unsentimental about criminals. But the one thing I know about prison is prison makes almost everybody worse who's in there. And that's what we've learned from the United States. You keep building mega prisons, you keep slapping people in there forever in the slammer with mandatory minimums, you're going to end up with more crime problems, not less. We got to get a joined up adult strategy based on real evidence, and that's what we haven't had from the Harper government.
Mr. Harper.
Well, we're making investments in youth crime prevention programs. In fact, there were renewal of those very programs in the budget we just tabled before Parliament, and yet all the opposition parties decided to combine and force an unnecessary election instead. I hope we get re-elected. We're able to pass those important initiatives because they have been effective programs, but none of that relieves us of our responsibility to make sure that punishment fits the crime. As Len says, that is simply not the case in too many instances in government today. We've put forward measures before Parliament to deal with those. Canadians have long said we want those passed. We will make sure they do get passed.
Mr. Doucette.
The problem with your attitude is instead of debating and adding experts coming to the committees, explaining their point of view, and taking the time to change things, some of the things have to be changed. But you're trying to put everything in the same bill. Just like the sixth of the sentence, that could have been done a lot before. You were refusing just for political reason, not to give us the credit of having proposing it. I think this is not the attitude. I think this is not the attitude how to work and face those huge challenges of living and having in a society and having the liberty and at the same time justice, and at the same time punishing those who deserve to be punished and respecting those who are the victims. And you mixed everything with a philosophy, it's your way or no way. That's the problem. You're not consulting people, you don't want to debate those things. This is always a problem.
That's simply not true. On the very measure you raised, there was a Conservative bill before the House to end that practice. There was a block bill before the House. We sat down, we negotiated something we could both live with. Obviously, I wanted something that would have been stronger, but nevertheless, what we did is we ended the practice. And Canadians have to understand this. We ended a practice where a huge number of offenders served 1/6 of their sentence, and they were automatically released from prison after 1/6. And yet the Liberals and NDP oppose that legislation. This is the kind of lack of balance in our system that we have to correct.
When
people receive sentences,
why we need so many more prisons when the crooks seem so happy in the Senate. But there are some very important issues that we haven't yet talked about here. First of all, violence against women. This requires specific and direct attention by the Parliament of Canada. And we would urge that that happen. And of course, one way that might happen is if we had a lot more women in Parliament. And I'm pleased to say that we have now just nominated the largest percentage of women ever in the history of Canada in the New Democratic Party, and hopefully that will help. But the other is we've got to tackle some of the underlying issues. If you talk to the leadership of Aboriginal communities, First Nation, Métis and Inuit, they cry out for just decent housing so that they don't have 3 and 4 families crammed into a completely unsatisfactory house. And basically with no hope for the future. And where do they find themselves? Drifting into the temptations of crime and then ultimately ending up in jail in far too high a percentage. And here's Sean Atleo, the National Chief, calling for a focus on education, a focus on housing, getting clean water into these communities, dealing with the fundamental poverty, and it's not just in Aboriginal communities, but it certainly is terribly severe there. Just in Aboriginal communities, but it certainly is terribly severe there. These are some of the fundamental underlying causes of what we're talking about here that we have to tackle as a country. But when you're giving away corporate tax cuts by the billions so that they can give million-dollar bonuses to the richest people in the country, you're not going to get down that path.
Mr. Ignatieff.
Mr. Layton mentioned the very shocking issue of violence against women. And we all remember the Polytechnic massacre. What that taught me, and I think it's taught all Canadians, is the absolutely crucial necessity in any crime strategy of gun control. You can't be tough on crime and tough on violence against women unless you stand up for gun control. And it's no secret that if Mr. Harper were to get back, God heaven help us, one of the first things he'll do is gut the gun registry. So you can't have a consistent criminal justice policy unless you're tough on guns. And I have to say that Mr. Layton didn't stand up to defend the gun registry when we have to. And it's absolutely crucial to safety for women and safety for community. And the reason I feel that so strongly is when I ask the cops in my own riding how they use the gun registry, they say, we don't send a cop into a building unless we've checked the gun registry. So it's crucial to keep cops safe as well as the rest of the community.
I think Mr. Layton deserves a chance to respond to that.
Well, my position on this is well known, and what he said is not true because I did stand up in the House. But what we're trying to do on this issue, which has been very divisive, and some politicians like to use it to divide Canadians, is actually to try and find some solutions, to bring the different parts of the country together so that we have strong gun control and that legitimate issues are properly addressed. That's been our approach. But then again, that's my whole approach to working with others to try to get results. It's our philosophy.
Let me talk about the gun registry, because obviously we have a very different view. We support a strong system of gun control. So do the gun owners of this country. We have licensing of gun owners. We have registration of handguns. We have most weapons, high-powered weapons, are prohibited in this country. But what farmers and hunters keep asking is why every time there's a crime problem in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, there's suddenly more rules slapped on them and registration slapped on them in rural Canada. That has not been an effective measure to control crime. Every single elected police officer in the House of Commons has voted against the long gun registry to focus on crime and on gun control that works and is cost-effective.
Monsieur Duceppe.
I would say that most of the bloc members are in rural sectors. And the question is not between the rural sectors and the cities. Calgary is not a rural sector, and you're against that. Eh? So when I look at the results of the vote that day, 83% of the people elected in Quebec supported the gun registry. 62% of the elected members in the rest of Canada wanted to abolish the gun registry. The real division was between Canada and Quebec that day. In the National Assembly in Quebec, Federalists or sovereigntists, right or left, unanimously want to maintain that. Because we think we want to live in a society where we're registering a lot of things. The cars are registered, the boats are registered. Even when you're hunting ducks, you got to register the ducks. If you go with a dog, the dog is registered. The only thing which is not registered is the gun.
Mr. Duceppe,
so we don't want to live in that kind of society.
I've been all around Quebec. There are lots of people who believe in strong gun control, don't believe in the registration of every single rifle and shotgun. You know, Jean-Guy Dagenet, the head of the Police Association, is a Conservative candidate in this election and doesn't support that kind of a gun registry. We need effective gun control, and we can't, every time we talk about crime, suddenly talk about rules for hunters and
30
farmers.
seconds.
We've got to actually have some
30
penalties
seconds
for
left.
the people who
But I think he's a
crime.
typical Tory candidate, saying something before being elected and saying that the opposite one is running as a Tory, just like you did in 2004 and now on.
Now, 30 seconds left in this segment. Mr. Ignatieff, you get the last word.
Police across the country say effective, comprehensive gun control is essential to public safety and keeping their officers safe. That's good enough for me. And people, women particularly, get killed with long guns, short guns. They don't care. All they know, they're dead. And all I care about is making sure that they're safe. And that means to me an integrated gun registry.
But Mr. Ignatieff, registration doesn't do any of that. That's why all the elected police officers, many police officers, Julian Fantino, the chief of the Ontario Provincial Police, a Conservative member of Parliament, doesn't support a long gun registry. You have to have policies that work on guns and that actually go after crime.
That's the last word in this segment. This is our